I absolutely refuse to sit next to her for a 7-hour flight. Find me another seat now." The words sliced through the hushed elegance of first class like a serrated knife, deliberate and dripping with contempt. Vanessa Whitmore's perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at the black woman quietly reading by the window. Every head in the cabin turned toward the commotion, conversations halting mid-sentence, the atmosphere instantly charged with tension. In exactly 8 minutes, Vanessa would discover that the quiet woman she'd just insulted didn't just have a ticket for the flight. She owned the entire airline and every seat on it. And by the time the plane landed in London, Vanessa's entire privileged world would come crashing down around her. Before we dive deeper into this story of power, prejudice, and consequences, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in accountability and justice served with quiet dignity, tap that subscribe button and give this video a like. You won't want to miss tomorrow's story about a black doctor mistaken for hospital staff who later performs life-saving surgery on the administrator who tried to have him removed. The first-class cabin of SkyElite Airlines flight SE335 from New York to London was the pinnacle of luxury air travel. Each seat was a private sanctuary of comfort upholstered in handcrafted cognac leather with brushed gold accents. The lighting was soft and ambient, designed to mimic natural daylight while soothing travel fatigue. Crystal glassware awaited the pre-departure champagne service, and Egyptian cotton pillows promised comfort for the overnight journey. This rarefied atmosphere had been meticulously engineered by the same woman now sitting quietly in seat 3A, absorbed in her reading as if the commotion around her was happening in another universe. But she was listening to every word, evaluating every response, and preparing to bring the full weight of her authority down upon the situation unfolding before her. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." Sofia Hernandez, the lead flight attendant, responded with practiced calm. "All of our first-class seats provide identical comfort and service. Your assigned seat is—" "I don't care what my assigned seat is," Vanessa interrupted, her voice rising higher. "I paid for comfort and a pleasant experience, and that is impossible sitting next to someone like her." The pause before the final words made their implication unmistakable. The black woman by the window hadn't yet looked up from her book, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the worn cover of Advanced Propulsion Systems Engineering: The Future of Flight. In 8 minutes, this supposedly forgettable woman in simple clothes would reveal herself as Elise Blackwood, the founder and CEO of SkyElite Airlines, and Vanessa Whitmore would learn the true cost of her arrogance. But first, the situation would get much, much worse. Elise Blackwood had boarded flight SE335 20 minutes before the other first-class passengers, slipping quietly through the jet bridge after a brief nod to the gate agents, who had been instructed not to acknowledge her status. At 43, she carried herself with the confident ease of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. Her simple black travel suit was expertly tailored, but intentionally without visible designer labels. Her natural hair was styled in a short professional cut that required minimal maintenance during travel. The only hint of luxury she allowed herself was a pair of handcrafted leather shoes from a small Italian workshop. A personal weakness and reminder of her first major business trip to Milan after securing initial funding for SkyElite. As she settled into seat 3A, she removed a well-worn engineering textbook from her leather messenger bag. The book was a sentimental relic from her MIT days, where she'd earned dual PhDs in aerospace engineering and business management. Her former professors still used her dissertation on fuel-efficient engine design as required reading. What they didn't teach in their courses was how a black woman with revolutionary ideas had to work 3 times as hard to secure the funding and partnerships that launched SkyElite Airlines 7 years ago. Today's flight was part of her quarterly undercover boss ritual, traveling incognito on her own airline to experience the service firsthand. No special treatment, no executive privileges, just the genuine customer experience. It was how she maintained the exceptional standards that had made SkyElite the fastest-growing luxury airline in the industry. Her philosophy was simple: excellence without arrogance, Service with dignity. She'd chosen this particular flight because of recent social media complaints about inconsistent service standards in first class. 3 passengers had reported subtle but concerning bias in how different travelers were treated. Nothing overt enough for a formal complaint, but the kind of microaggressions that Elise had spent her career fighting to eliminate. She needed to observe for herself, take mental notes, and address any issues with her executive team upon returning to headquarters. What she hadn't planned on was becoming the direct target of exactly the type of behavior she was investigating. Vanessa Whitmore swept through the first-class cabin like she owned it, trailing an overpowering cloud of expensive perfume and radiating entitlement from every pore. At 52, she had perfected the art of weaponizing her privilege, using it like a battering ram to clear her path through life. Her blonde hair was freshly highlighted in an elaborate style that must have taken hours. Her cream-colored St. John knit suit was accessorized with a fortune in diamonds, earrings, necklace, bracelet, and rings that caught the light with every dramatic gesture of her manicured hands. "Gregory," she barked at her husband, who struggled behind her with their matching leather carry-ons. "Make sure those go in the overhead properly. Last time they crushed my Hermes scarf, Gregory Whitmore, 54, CEO of Whitmore Investments, was a study in contradiction. Powerful in boardrooms, but pathetically submissive in his marriage. Tall with graying temples and the soft physique of someone who prioritized business dinners over exercise. He moved with the perpetual wince of a man expecting to be scolded at any moment. His bespoke suit couldn't disguise the stoop in his shoulders as he hurried to comply with his wife's demands. "Right away, dear," he mumbled, lifting the bags with effort. As he struggled with the overhead compartment, he shot apologetic glances at the other passengers. This was the familiar dance of their relationship, Vanessa creating chaos, Gregory cleaning up behind her, both pretending this was normal. "Champagne," Vanessa demanded of a passing flight attendant without making eye contact. Not a request, a command. When the flight attendant continued walking to serve another passenger first, Vanessa's face contorted in disbelief. Sofia Hernandez, the 34-year-old lead flight attendant, had mastered the art of maintaining dignity under pressure during her 12 years in the sky. With her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and her SkyElite uniform perfectly pressed, she moved through the cabin with graceful efficiency. She'd been hand-picked to lead the first-class cabin on international routes after receiving consistent commendations for her professionalism and calm under pressure. What passengers like Vanessa Whitmore never realized was that Sofia had been specifically trained in SkyElite's signature approach to service, where respect flowed in both directions. The airline's progressive policies empowered crew members to maintain standards of mutual dignity, a philosophy that had attracted top talent from across the industry. Sofia approached Vanessa with a professional smile that revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Mrs. Whitmore, welcome aboard. I'll be with you momentarily with your pre-departure beverage. We're serving passengers in seating order to ensure everyone is attended to efficiently." Vanessa's eyes narrowed dangerously. She wasn't accustomed to waiting for anything, and the calm explanation felt like a personal insult. Before she could respond, Gregory slid into his seat beside her, attempting to defuse the situation. "The champagne will be here shortly, dear," he said placatingly. "Look at these seats, so much more comfortable than our last flight to London." Vanessa ignored him, her attention now fixed on her surroundings. That's when she noticed Elise sitting quietly across the aisle, absorbed in her textbook, dressed in clothes that, while clearly of good quality, lacked the ostentatious branding Vanessa associated with first-class travelers. Vanessa leaned toward Gregory and whispered in a voice deliberately loud enough to be heard. "They're letting just anyone into first class these days. Standards have really slipped." Gregory winced visibly, glancing at Elise with embarrassment. "Vanessa, please," he murmured, his voice strained. "Let's just enjoy our flight." But Vanessa was just getting started. When Sofia returned with champagne, Vanessa looked pointedly at Elise and said, I need to speak with whoever assigned seating. There's been a mistake with my reservation. Sofia followed Vanessa's gaze, noting how Elise hadn't reacted at all to the obvious slight. What seems to be the issue, Mrs. Whitmore? Your boarding passes show you and Mr. Whitmore assigned to 3B and 3C as requested. Yes, but I wasn't informed about who would be seated next to us, Vanessa replied, her voice dripping with implication. I specifically asked for a quiet, comfortable experience. That won't be possible with the current arrangement. Sofia's professional smile didn't waver, but something hardened in her eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, all passengers who have purchased first-class tickets are entitled to their assigned seats. I can assure you that all our guests maintain the highest standards of courtesy. The subtle emphasis on all our guests and courtesy wasn't lost on Vanessa, whose face flushed with anger. Are you implying something? Not at all, Sofia replied smoothly. I'm simply explaining our seating policy. Now may I get you anything else before takeoff? In the window seat, Elise turned a page in her book, her expression neutral. But her eyes weren't moving across the text anymore. She was listening intently, evaluating her employee's handling of this increasingly hostile passenger. Sofia was following protocol perfectly, professional, firm, and respectful despite the obvious baiting. Elise made a mental note to commend her later. Around them, other first-class passengers were taking notice of the exchange. In seat 2D, Alex Rodriguez, a 28-year-old tech entrepreneur, had discreetly begun recording with his smartphone, his instincts telling him this interaction might be worth documenting. Across from him, Diane and Richard Thompson, a retired couple in their 70s, exchanged glances of disapproval at Vanessa's behavior. In seat 4A, James Wilson, a 40-year-old investment banker, initially seemed to sympathize with Vanessa, nodding slightly at her complaints. But as her comments became more obviously prejudiced, discomfort crept into his expression. Gregory Vanessa hissed, "Say something." "We're platinum members. We spend a fortune with this airline." Gregory cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps there's another pair of seats available?" he asked Sofia, his tone apologetic even as he enabled his wife's behavior. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Whitmore," Sofia replied with practiced patience. "But we're fully booked in first class today. I can assure you that all our seats offer identical comfort and service." Vanessa's face contorted with fury. "This is unacceptable," she snapped, her voice rising again. "I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." Sofia nodded, once her professionalism intact despite the escalating situation. "I'll ask Mr. Turner to come speak with you. He's our purser for today's flight. In the meantime, please enjoy your champagne." As Sofia walked away to fetch her supervisor, Vanessa turned to glare directly at Elise, who still hadn't acknowledged the commotion. "This is what happens when airlines start handing out upgrades to meet their diversity quotas," she said loudly, clearly intending for Elise to hear. Elise finally looked up from her book, her gaze level and calm as she met Vanessa's hostile stare. She didn't speak, didn't react, simply observed, like a scientist studying a particularly interesting specimen under glass. After a moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, she returned to her reading, dismissing Vanessa as unworthy of further attention. That silent dismissal infuriated Vanessa more than any possible retort. Red-faced and seething, she turned to Gregory. "I will not sit here for 7 hours," she declared. "Fix this now." As Gregory fumbled for a response, Michael Turner, the 45-year-old flight supervisor, approached with a concerned expression. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing of someone with decades of experience in aviation, he projected calm authority. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began courteously, "I understand you have concerns about your seating arrangement. How may I assist you?" Vanessa straightened in her seat, recognizing someone she perceived as having actual authority. Finally, she said, "Someone who might understand customer service. I need different seats immediately. The current arrangement is unacceptable." Michael's gaze flickered briefly to Elise, then back to Vanessa. May I ask what specific issue you're experiencing with your current seats? Don't play dumb, Vanessa snapped. Look at who they've seated us next to. I paid for a premium experience, not to be uncomfortable for 7 hours. Michael's expression didn't change, but his posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his voice now carrying a hint of steel beneath the courtesy. SkyElite has a strict non-discrimination policy. All our passengers deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of race, gender, religion, or any other characteristic. Vanessa gasped in theatrical outrage. Are you accusing me of discrimination? How dare you? I simply expect a certain caliber of fellow passengers in first class. Someone who belongs here. Every passenger in this cabin has the same right to be here, Michael replied firmly. Now I can offer you an alternative. If you find your current seating truly unacceptable, I can see if we have availability in business class or economy. Those would be your options, as first class is fully booked. The suggestion that she might move to a lower class rather than displacing Elise was so shocking to Vanessa that she momentarily lost the ability to speak. Her mouth opened and closed wordlessly as the implicit rebuke sank in. Gregory, sensing disaster, attempted intervention. That won't be necessary, he said quickly. We're perfectly fine here. My wife is just tired from our busy schedule. I am not tired, Vanessa snapped, finding her voice. I am being discriminated against as a paying customer. Do you have any idea who my husband is? Gregory, tell him who you are. Gregory looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. Vanessa. Please, Mr. Whitmore is CEO of Whitmore Investments, Vanessa announced loudly. We control portfolios worth billions. One word from us could impact your airline's stock price. Michael remained unruffled. We value all our customers equally at SkyElite, Mrs. Whitmore. Now, what would you prefer, to remain in your assigned seats? Or shall I look into alternatives in other cabins? The standoff had now drawn the attention of every passenger in first class. Alex Rodriguez was still recording discreetly, while the Thompsons watched with undisguised disapproval of Vanessa's behavior. James Wilson had shifted uncomfortably in his seat, no longer making eye contact with anyone. And Elise Blackwood continued reading her book, a slight smile now playing at the corner of her lips. In her peripheral vision, she observed her employees handling the situation exactly as they had been trained, with dignity, firmness, and a refusal to compromise the company's values, even for a supposedly high-value customer. The confrontation was about to escalate to its breaking point, and when it did, Vanessa Whitmore would discover exactly who she had been trying to displace, and the true meaning of consequences. Vanessa Whitmore wasn't accustomed to being denied anything, and the calm refusal from both Sofia and Michael had pushed her into a state of near apoplectic rage. Her face had flushed to a dangerous shade of red, clashing with her cream-colored suit and meticulously applied makeup. "This is outrageous," she hissed loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "I want your names, both of you, and your employee numbers. I'll be contacting your corporate office the moment we land." Michael Turner remained professional but unmoved. "My name is Michael Turner, lead purser on this flight. Sofia Hernandez is our first-class cabin manager. We're both happy to provide our employee identification if you wish to contact customer relations. However, I should inform you that all interactions with passengers are documented in our service logs." The implied warning, that her behavior was being officially recorded, only fueled Vanessa's indignation. She turned her glare back to Elise, who continued reading as if the escalating drama beside her was no more significant than distant traffic noise. "Look at her," Vanessa said to Gregory, not bothering to lower her voice. "Probably used points from some credit card promotion to get here. Doesn't even have proper luggage. Clearly doesn't belong in first class." Gregory, sweating profusely now, tried again to placate his wife. "Vanessa, please. Everyone can hear you." "Good. Let them hear me. I'm not ashamed to demand what I've paid for." Sofia stepped forward slightly, positioning herself protectively between Vanessa and Elise. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to remind you that disruptive behavior can affect the comfort and safety of all passengers. If you're unable to maintain appropriate conduct, we may need to consider whether you can remain on this flight." The veiled suggestion that she might be removed from the aircraft struck Vanessa like a physical blow. In all her years of imperious travel, no flight attendant had ever dared suggest she might be the one asked to leave. "Are you threatening me?" she asked incredulously. "Not at all," Sofia replied evenly. "I'm explaining our policy. SkyElite is committed to ensuring a respectful environment for all passengers and crew. That's non-negotiable." Alex Rodriguez, still recording from his seat, whispered to the passenger beside him. "This is going viral for sure. Classic Karen meltdown in first class." The passenger, a young woman with an Australian accent, whispered back, "I can't believe she's being so blatantly racist. It's 2025, for God's sake." Their comments, though quiet, carried in the tense silence of the cabin. Vanessa's head whipped around, searching for the source of the whispers. "Who said that?" "Who's recording this?" she demanded. "That's an invasion of privacy," Michael intervened smoothly. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're about to begin our pre-departure safety briefing. I'd appreciate your cooperation in allowing our crew to complete their safety duties without further disruption." Vanessa wasn't finished. She turned to the couple across the aisle, the Thompsons seeking allies. "Don't you think this is appalling treatment? They're acting like I'm the problem, when all I want is appropriate seating." Diane Thompson, elegant in her 70s with a lifetime of good breeding behind her, fixed Vanessa with a glacial stare. "I find your behavior appalling, young woman. That poor lady hasn't said a word to provoke you." Richard Thompson nodded in agreement. "In my day, we were taught that true class has nothing to do with what you wear or how much money you spend. It's about how you treat others." Vanessa gasped at the unexpected rebuke. She turned to James Wilson, catching his eye. "You understand, don't you? Standards matter." James, who had initially seemed sympathetic, now looked deeply uncomfortable. "Actually, I think we should all just try to have a pleasant flight," he muttered, breaking eye contact and suddenly becoming fascinated with the safety card in his seatback pocket. Isolated and increasingly desperate, Vanessa changed tactics. She leaned toward Elise directly. "Excuse me," she said in a falsely sweet tone. "Wouldn't you be more comfortable in another seat? I'd be happy to speak to the airline about compensating you for the inconvenience." For the first time, Elise closed her book, keeping her place with one finger. She turned to face Vanessa fully, her expression composed and evaluative. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. "No, thank you," Elise said simply, her voice rich and measured. "I'm perfectly comfortable where I am." Without another word, she opened her book again and returned to reading. The dismissal was so complete, so elegant in its simplicity, that a few passengers actually chuckled. Vanessa's attempted bribe had been declined with such effortless dignity that she was left floundering for a response. In that moment of confusion, Sofia seized the opportunity to move the situation forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for departure. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, your seats are upright, and all electronic devices are in airplane mode or powered off." But Vanessa wasn't ready to concede. As Sofia moved past her seat to check on other passengers, Vanessa reached out and grabbed her wrist. "We're not finished here," she snapped. Sofia froze, looking pointedly at Vanessa's hand on her wrist. "Please remove your hand from my person immediately," she said, her voice low but firm. The physical contact crossed a line. Michael stepped forward quickly. "Mrs. Whitmore, touching our crew members is absolutely prohibited. This is your final warning. If you cannot comply with basic standards of behavior, we will have no choice but to remove you from this flight." The threat of removal now seemed very real. Gregory intervened with renewed desperation. "She understands. It won't happen again." Vanessa let go of her arm. "Now." Vanessa released Sofia's wrist, but her expression promised retribution. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Both of you will be looking for new jobs by tomorrow." The cabin had gone completely silent, every passenger watching the drama unfold. Even the background preparations for takeoff seemed to have paused as the confrontation reached its critical point. Sofia rubbed her wrist discreetly and continued her safety checks with remarkable composure. Michael remained stationed nearby, clearly unwilling to leave his crew member vulnerable to further aggression. As the tension vibrated through the cabin, Elise continued her observation, mentally documenting every detail of how her staff handled this increasingly volatile situation. She was impressed with their professionalism, but concerned about the escalation. The airline's policies empowered staff to protect themselves and other passengers, but she knew the personal toll such confrontations could take. Sofia would receive commendation and support after this flight regardless of how the situation resolved. The safety demonstration began, flight attendants demonstrating oxygen masks and life vests with practiced movements. Vanessa sat rigidly in her seat, refusing to pay attention. Her jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle ticked visibly in her cheek. Gregory watched the demonstration with exaggerated interest, clearly trying to compensate for his wife's defiance. As the aircraft began to push back from the gate, Vanessa reached for her glass of champagne and took a large, angry swallow. Then, with deliberate malice, she shifted in her seat and accidentally bumped her arm, sending the remainder of the champagne splashing directly onto Elise's open book. "Oh," Vanessa exclaimed with transparently false concern. "How clumsy of me." The champagne soaked into the pages of the engineering textbook, a treasured possession that had traveled with Elise from MIT to boardrooms around the world. Golden droplets beaded on the cover and seeped between the pages, destroying the handwritten notes in the margins that documented years of thought and innovation. For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across Elise's face, a momentary flash of sadness quickly replaced by something cooler and more resolute. She closed the dripping book carefully and set it aside, then reached for the call button above her seat. Sofia appeared immediately. When she saw the champagne-soaked book, her eyes widened with understanding. "I'm so sorry about your book. Let me get you something to help clean that." "Thank you, Sofia," Elise replied, using the flight attendant's name with familiar ease that didn't go unnoticed. "And when you have a moment, I'd like to speak with Michael as well." Sofia's professional mask slipped for just an instant as she registered Elise's use of their names without introduction. Right away, she said, hurrying to fetch paper towels and summon Michael. Vanessa, misinterpreting the interaction as a complaint about her accident, smiled triumphantly. "Some people just don't know how to handle the occasional mishap with grace," she said loudly to Gregory. "They don't belong in first class." Gregory, beyond mortified, could only stare at his hands. Michael arrived quickly, concern evident in his expression. "Is there a problem?" he asked, looking between Elise and the wet book. Elise smiled at him with unexpected warmth. "Michael, I think it's time we addressed this situation properly. Would you mind making an announcement to the cabin? I believe we need a reset before this flight continues." Michael's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm not sure I understand." "It's all right," Elise said, reaching into her simple leather messenger bag. "I think Mrs. Whitmore should know exactly who she's been trying to displace, and whose book she just ruined." She withdrew a small leather portfolio and handed Michael what appeared to be an identification card. As he read it, his face transformed from confusion to shock to something approaching awe. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice suddenly formal. "Of course. Right away." As Michael moved to the front of the cabin to use the announcement system, Vanessa leaned forward with malicious curiosity. "What's happening now?" Filing a complaint about the dangerous champagne, she mocked. Elise turned to her with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "No, Mrs. Whitmore. I don't file complaints with my own company. I implement solutions." Before Vanessa could process this cryptic response, Michael's voice came over the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. Before we continue our departure, I have an important announcement. We are honored today to have with us Dr. Elise Blackwood, founder and chief executive officer of SkyElite Airlines. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Every head turned toward Elise, who remained composed as her identity was revealed. Alex Rodriguez's phone was still recording, capturing the moment that Vanessa Whitmore's expression transformed from smug satisfaction to dawning horror. Dr. Blackwood regularly flies with us to experience our service firsthand, Michael continued. She has asked me to inform you that she will be addressing a situation that has arisen in our first-class cabin. Thank you for your attention. He handed the microphone to Elise, who had risen from her seat. Standing in the aisle, she cut an impressive figure despite her simple attire. The authority she radiated had nothing to do with designer labels and everything to do with authentic power earned through intelligence and determination. Thank you, Michael. She said, her voice warm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. I don't usually reveal myself during these evaluative flights, but circumstances today require an exception. She turned to face the entire cabin, making eye contact with several passengers, before finally resting her gaze on Vanessa and Gregory Whitmore. At SkyElite Airlines, we have one core principle that guides everything we do. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Every person, regardless of what they look like, what they wear, or how they speak. That principle is non-negotiable and applies to everyone who steps aboard our aircraft, passengers and crew alike. Vanessa had shrunk into her seat, her earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Gregory looked physically ill, his complexion ashen as he grasped the magnitude of what his wife had done. Today, Elise continued. I've observed behavior that violates that core principle. I've witnessed attempts to intimidate our crew, discriminatory comments, and finally deliberate destruction of personal property. She held up her ruined textbook. This book has been with me since my days at MIT. The notes in the margins helped design the very engines powering this aircraft. Murmurs of shock and disapproval spread through the cabin. Alex Rodriguez was still recording, his eyes wide with the understanding that he was documenting something extraordinary. Mrs. Whitmore Elise set her voice level as she addressed Vanessa directly. You asked for someone in authority. Here I am. Now I have a question for you. Do you believe you can continue this flight while respecting our crew and fellow passengers? Vanessa's mouth opened and closed without sound. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she found herself utterly without words. Elise nodded as if the silence was answer enough. I thought not. She turned to Michael. Please arrange for Mrs. and Mr. Whitmore to be escorted from the aircraft. Their bags will follow on the next available flight. What? Vanessa finally found her voice. You can't do this. We have meetings in London, important business connections. I'm afraid I can, Elise replied calmly. As CEO, I'm responsible for the safety and dignity of everyone on this aircraft. You've demonstrated that you're unwilling to contribute to that environment. She turned to Gregory, who had not protested the decision. Mr. Whitmore, you're welcome to remain on board if you wish to travel separately from your wife. The choice is yours. Gregory looked at his wife, then back at Elise. For a moment it seemed he might choose to stay, to finally stand apart from Vanessa's behavior. But years of conditioning won out. With a defeated sigh, he shook his head. I'll go with my wife, he said quietly. Elise nodded. As you wish. She turned to Michael. Please coordinate with ground staff and ensure that Mrs. Whitmore's comments about diversity quotas and her treatment of Sofia are fully documented in the incident report. Already done, Michael confirmed. The cabin voice recorders have captured everything. This was news to Vanessa, whose eyes widened in fresh horror. Voice recorders. You've been recording us. SkyElite's premium cabins feature a quality assurance monitoring system, Elise explained. It helps us maintain service standards and, when necessary, document incidents. The system was my innovation, actually, part of our commitment to protecting both passengers and crew from mistreatment. She turned back to the rest of the first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We'll have the Whitmores on their way shortly, and then we can continue our journey to London. Thank you for your patience." As Elise retook her seat, the cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. The Thompsons nodded approvingly. Alex Rodriguez gave a quiet whoop of celebration, and even James Wilson joined in, perhaps trying to distance himself from his earlier ambivalence. Sophia approached with a tablet in hand. "Miss Blackwood ground staff is ready to escort the Whitmores from the aircraft, and I've notified headquarters about the situation as per protocol." "Thank you, Sophia," Elise replied warmly. "You and Michael handled this situation exemplarily. I'll make sure that's reflected in your records." 2 airport security officers appeared at the front of the cabin. Michael gestured to the Whitmores. "Sir, ma'am, if you'll please gather your belongings and come with me." Vanessa stood on shaking legs, her composure shattered. "This isn't over," she said to Elise, attempting to resurrect her earlier bravado. "Do you have any idea who we know?" "The connections we have?" Elise regarded her with something approaching pity. "Mrs. Whitmore, I built an international airline from scratch while facing barriers you can't imagine. Do you really think your threats impress me?" As Vanessa and Gregory were escorted from the cabin, the remaining passengers watched in stunned silence. Once they were gone, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the space as if a poisonous presence had been removed. Elise turned to Sophia. "I believe I was offered champagne earlier. I think I'll have that now." Sophia smiled, genuine and warm for the first time since the ordeal began. "Right away, Ms. Blackwood. And perhaps a cloth to try salvaging your book." "Thank you." "And Sophia, it's Elise, please, at least for the rest of this flight." As the aircraft finally began its takeoff roll, Elise gazed out the window at the receding lights of New York. The confrontation was over, but its effects were just beginning to ripple outward. By the time they reached London, Vanessa Whitmore's world would be unraveling thread by thread, and she had pulled the first string herself. Back in the terminal, Vanessa Whitmore was experiencing something entirely new to her privileged existence, the consequences of her own actions. As security officers escorted her and Gregory through the airport, other travelers stared openly, some even pointing their phones to capture the spectacle of the well-dressed couple being removed from their flight. "Stop filming us!" Vanessa snapped at a teenager who had raised his phone in their direction. "This is harassment." The security officer, a patient woman with gray-streaked hair, spoke without breaking stride. "Ma'am, we're in a public space. People are allowed to record." "Do you know who we are?" Vanessa demanded for the 10th time. "Yes, ma'am. You're the passengers being removed from SkyElite Flight 335 for disruptive behavior and discriminatory comments." Gregory, walking silently beside his wife, had retreated into a shell of mortification. The gravity of the situation was finally penetrating his consciousness. This wasn't just an embarrassing incident. This was potentially catastrophic for their reputation and his business. As they reached the terminal, Vanessa's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She grabbed it eagerly, desperate for connection to her world of influence and privilege. The message was from Hampton Wellington III, their most important business contact in London. "Seeing disturbing video from SkyElite flight. Is that you, Vanessa? Call immediately." Her blood ran cold. The video was already circulating. How was that possible? The flight had barely left the gate. She turned to Gregory, thrust her phone at him. "They're posting videos. They can't do that. Call our lawyers." Gregory scanned the message, his face growing even paler. "Vanessa, we need to think carefully about our next steps. This could affect Whitmore Investments." "This is all her fault," Vanessa hissed, referring to Elise. "That woman set me up. She pretended to be nobody important, dressed like that just to trick me." The security officer exchanged a glance with her colleague, clearly unimpressed with Vanessa's attempt to rewrite history. "Sir, ma'am, we need to complete some paperwork regarding your removal from the flight. Please follow me to the office." Back on the aircraft, the atmosphere in first class had transformed. The tension had evaporated, replaced by an almost festive mood as passengers processed the extraordinary scene they had witnessed. Several were openly discussing the incident, comparing notes on what they had seen and heard. Alex Rodriguez had stopped recording but was now reviewing the footage on his phone. "This is incredible," he said to the Australian woman seated beside him. The way she revealed herself was like something from a movie. So calm, so controlled. "She was magnificent," the woman agreed. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation with such dignity." Across the aisle, the Thompsons were discussing the incident in low voices. "In all our years of flying, I've never witnessed such appalling behavior," Diane was saying. "That poor CEO, to have her book ruined like that." "Justice was served," Richard replied firmly. That Whitmore woman needed a lesson in humility. Even James Wilson, who had initially seemed sympathetic to Vanessa's complaints, was now eager to distance himself from her perspective. "I never thought she'd go that far," he explained to the passenger next to him. "Making a scene is one thing, but the comments she made were totally unacceptable." Sofia moved efficiently through the cabin, ensuring everyone had what they needed as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. She paused at Elise's seat, where the CEO was attempting to dry the pages of her ruined textbook with cocktail napkins. "I'm afraid it might be beyond saving," Sofia said sympathetically. Elise smiled ruefully. "The book, yes. But the ideas it inspired are flying us across the Atlantic right now. That's something Vanessa Whitmore could never destroy." Michael approached with the cabin satellite phone. "Ms. Blackwood, I have Natalie Jackson from headquarters on the line. She says it's urgent." Elise took the phone, her expression shifting to one of focused attention. "Natalie, what's happening?" "Natalie Jackson." SkyElite's 38-year-old chief communications officer was already in crisis management mode at the company's New York headquarters. "Elise, the video is everywhere. Alex Rodriguez, the tech entrepreneur in Seat 2D, has over 5 million followers on social platforms. He posted clips from the confrontation before the plane even took off, and they've gone viral. We're talking hundreds of thousands of shares in under an hour." Elise processed this information quickly. "What's the public reaction? Overwhelmingly positive toward you and SkyElite. People are calling you a hero for standing up to racism and entitlement. The hashtag #SkyElite Justice is trending globally. But there's more. Gregory Whitmore is CEO of Whitmore Investments. They manage portfolios worth billions, including pension funds and university endowments. This could have significant financial implications for them." Elise considered the wider ramifications. "Have our legal team review the incident recordings. I want to ensure we've documented everything properly in case the Whitmores attempt to dispute what happened. Already on it," Natalie confirmed. "And Daniel Ramirez has initiated our crisis response protocol. We're monitoring social media, preparing statements, and coordinating with PR teams in London for your arrival." "Good. Keep me updated if anything significant develops. I'll be available by satellite phone throughout the flight." As Elise handed the phone back to Michael, she noticed that several passengers were watching her with newfound respect and curiosity. The revelation of her identity had transformed how they perceived her, despite nothing about her having changed, except their knowledge of who she was. That transformation, the way identity altered perception, was precisely what had motivated her to create SkyElite's undercover evaluation program. She had experienced both sides throughout her career, the dismissal when people underestimated her and the sudden deference when they learned of her accomplishments. Neither reaction reflected who she truly was. Sofia returned with fresh champagne. "Your drink, Elise." "Thank you, Sofia. And please, after everything we've been through together, I think we're well past Ms. Blackwood. Elise is fine." Sofia smiled. "Old habits. The crew from Flight SE-335 is seated in the front row as you requested. Michael is just finishing his briefing with the London-based team leaders. In the 3 months since their promotion, Sofia and Michael had transformed their respective departments, implementing the enhanced training programs developed in response to the Whitmore incident, and creating new channels for both passengers and crew to report concerns about discriminatory behavior. Their work had already resulted in measurable improvements in customer satisfaction scores and employee retention rates. Natalie Jackson joined them, tablet in hand. Final social media check before we start. Mentions are up 340% from baseline sentiment analysis, shows 96% positive or neutral. The live stream already has over 200,000 viewers waiting for the event to begin. And our special announcement, Elise inquired. Ready to go. The partner airlines have all confirmed their participation. This is going to make waves across the entire industry. With a nod to her team, Elise moved to the edge of the stage as the house lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the podium. The murmur of conversation in the hangar faded to expectant silence. Daniel Ramirez, now serving as both Chief Operating Officer and Master of Ceremonies, stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, and honored guests, welcome to this historic occasion. 3 months ago, an incident aboard one of our flights sparked a conversation about dignity, respect, and accountability that has resonated around the world. Today, we gather to transform that moment into a movement that will change not just one airline, but an entire industry. He gestured toward the side of the stage. Please welcome the founder and CEO of SkyElite Airlines, the visionary leader whose principles have guided us from the beginning, Dr. Elise Blackwood. Applause thundered through the hangar as Elise walked to the podium. She waited for the ovation to subside before beginning her address. Thank you all for being here today, physically in this room and virtually around the world. When I founded SkyElite Airlines 7 years ago, I had a simple vision to create an environment where every person, passenger and crew member alike, would be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance, background, or status. She paused, making eye contact with familiar faces in the front rows. That vision was tested 3 months ago on flight SE335 from New York to London. Many of you have seen the videos, read the stories, followed the developments that followed. What began as an unfortunately common example of discriminatory behavior became something much more significant. A moment that forced us all to examine how we respond when our core values are challenged. On screens throughout the hangar, carefully selected images appeared. Sofia standing firm against Vanessa's demands, Michael explaining the company's policies, crew members from other flights demonstrating the professionalism that had become SkyElite's hallmark. I'm proud of how our team responded that day. They didn't know their CEO was watching. They didn't know cameras were recording. They simply did what was right, because that's who they are, and that's what this company stands for. More applause filled the space with particular enthusiasm from the sections where SkyElite crew members were seated. Today, we're taking the next step. The Dignity in Flight initiative isn't just a training program or a policy update. It's a comprehensive commitment to transforming the travel experience for everyone, built around 3 core principles. The screens displayed an elegant graphic showcasing the initiative's framework. First, respectful service, ensuring that every interaction between our staff and passengers is grounded in mutual dignity. Second, inclusive excellence, creating an environment where diversity is not just welcomed, but valued as essential to our success. And third, accountable culture, maintaining standards of behavior for everyone in our spaces regardless of their position or status. She gestured to the front row where Sofia, Michael, and the crew from flight SE335 were seated. To implement these principles, we've created 2 new executive positions, Director of Passenger Experience and Director of Crew Advocacy. I'm pleased to announce that these roles will be filled by Sofia Hernandez and Michael Turner, whose exemplary handling of a challenging situation demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need. Sofia and Michael stood briefly to acknowledge the applause, their expressions reflecting the significance of their new responsibilities. But the most important announcement today goes beyond SkyElite Airlines, Elise continued. I'm proud to reveal that 12 major airlines from around the world have agreed to adopt the Dignity in Flight standards and training programs, creating a unified approach to combating discrimination and harassment in air travel globally. Gasps and applause rippled through the audience as the screens displayed the logos of participating airlines, competitors who had set aside rivalries to address a shared challenge. Together, these carriers represent over 60% of global air traffic. Their commitment will ensure that no matter which airline you choose, you can expect an environment where respect is the foundation of service, not an optional extra. Elise's expression grew more serious as she continued. I want to address something important. The incident that catalyzed this initiative involved behavior that sadly remains too common in our society. The assumption that certain people don't belong in certain spaces based on how they look. I experienced it that day, not as a CEO, but as a Black woman whose presence was deemed inappropriate simply because of appearance. The hangar had grown completely silent, every person focused intently on her words. The response when my identity was revealed highlighted something troubling. The idea that respect should be contingent on status rather than inherent in how we treat each other as human beings. The Dignity in Flight initiative rejects that premise entirely. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity not because of their title or wealth, but because it is the right thing to do. She paused, allowing the weight of this fundamental principle to resonate. This isn't about public relations or brand positioning. It's about building the kind of world we want to live in. One interaction at a time, one flight at a time, one day at a time. 18 months after the incident that transformed SkyElite Airlines from a respected luxury carrier into a global symbol of principled leadership, the company's headquarters in New York hosted a different kind of gathering. The spacious atrium had been converted into an elegant exhibition space, featuring interactive displays, historical timelines, and personal testimonials, all centered around the Dignity in Flight initiative that had revolutionized standards of respect throughout the aviation industry. The exhibition, titled Transforming Travel, the first year of Dignity in Flight, documented the journey from that pivotal confrontation aboard Flight SE335 to the comprehensive industry-wide changes it had inspired. Visitors moved through thoughtfully designed spaces that highlighted key milestones from the initial viral video to the global partnership that now encompassed 34 airlines, representing over 70% of international air traffic. Elise Blackwood stood near the center of the exhibition, observing visitors' reactions as they engaged with the displays. She was particularly interested in how people responded to the perspectives section, where passengers and crew members shared personal experiences of how the initiative had affected their travel experiences. The reception has been overwhelmingly positive, noted Natalie Jackson, who had joined Elise after overseeing the final preparations for the evening's formal program, especially from industry representatives. Several CEOs have mentioned how the initiative has positively impacted their corporate cultures beyond just passenger interactions. That's exactly what we hoped for, Elise replied. Sustainable change happens when principles transcend specific contexts and become embedded in organizational DNA. As they spoke, Sofia Hernandez approached with a distinguished older gentleman, Dr. Harrison Myers, the renowned sociologist whose groundbreaking work on dignity in public spaces had informed key aspects of the initiative's framework. Dr. Myers has some fascinating observations about the exhibition, Sofia explained as she made the introduction. Dr. Blackwood Myers greeted her warmly. What you've created here goes far beyond corporate social responsibility. You've engineered a fundamental shift in behavioral norms within a shared public environment. That's extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Thank you, Elise replied, genuinely appreciative of his expert assessment. Though I'm not sure how much was engineered and how much was simply responding effectively to an opportunity for change. Sometimes the most profound innovations arise from necessity rather than design, Myers observed. What interests me most is how you've managed to create accountability without shame, focusing on upholding standards rather than punishing transgressors. That's the key to sustainable behavioral change. Their conversation continued as they toured the remaining exhibits, discussing the measurable impacts of the initiative. The 67% reduction in reported incidents of discriminatory behavior across participating airlines, the improved job satisfaction among cabin crew, the shift in passenger expectations regarding conduct in premium cabins. As the exhibition space began to fill with invited guests for the evening program, Elise excused herself to prepare for her remarks. In the quiet of her office, she reviewed her notes one final time, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The past 18 months had seen profound transformations, not just within SkyElite and the aviation industry, but in the broader conversation about dignity, respect, and accountability in public spaces. What began as a confrontation between two passengers had catalyzed changes that now affected millions of travelers daily. Sofia and Michael had excelled in their executive roles, transforming their departments into industry benchmarks for excellence in training and advocacy. The Wings of Dignity pin had become a recognized symbol of commitment to respectful service, proudly worn by aviation professionals around the world. The initiative's influence had expanded beyond airlines to hotels, cruise ships, and other service industries, seeking to establish clearer standards for mutual respect between staff and customers. Elise had been consulted by executives from diverse sectors, all interested in replicating SkyElite's success in creating cultures where dignity was non-negotiable. And what of the Whitmores, whose actions had inadvertently sparked this movement? Gregory had followed through on his commitment to supporting diversity in STEM fields. The foundation he established had grown significantly, now funding educational opportunities for hundreds of students from underrepresented backgrounds. He had rebuilt his professional life not as an investment manager, but as an advocate for corporate ethical reform, speaking candidly about his own journey from complicity to accountability. Vanessa's path had been more complex and private. After months of retreat from public life, she had eventually engaged with a respected coach specializing in bias awareness and personal transformation. According to mutual acquaintances, the work had been challenging and often painful as she confronted deeply ingrained patterns of behavior and the genuine harm they had caused. Whether this process would lead to lasting change remained uncertain, but the effort itself represented a significant departure from her initial defensive posture. The Whitmore marriage had not survived the reckoning that followed the incident. Their separation, initially temporary, had evolved into a permanent dissolution, as Gregory committed to a fundamentally different way of engaging with the world, one that proved incompatible with the relationship they had built over 30 years. Their children, Elizabeth and Jonathan, had embarked on their own journeys of reflection, examining how their upbringing had shaped their perspectives and working to align their professional and personal lives more closely with values of inclusivity and respect. As Elise prepared to return to the atrium for the evening program, a notification appeared on her tablet, a news alert about a major investment bank implementing new standards for client interactions based explicitly on the dignity in flight principles. Another ripple of influence spreading outward from that pivotal moment on flight SE335. The formal program began with a short film documenting the initiative's development and impact, featuring testimonials from crew members, passengers, and industry leaders. As the film concluded to enthusiastic applause, Michael Turner took the stage to introduce the evening's keynote speaker. When we talk about leadership, he began, we often focus on authority, influence, or charisma. But true leadership, the kind that transforms not just organizations, but entire industries, is about vision and values, about seeing possibilities where others see only problems, about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, even when no one is watching. He gestured toward the side of the stage. Please welcome the visionary founder and CEO of SkyElite Airlines, whose leadership has redefined excellence in our industry, Dr. Elise Blackwood. Elise walked to the podium amid sustained applause, taking a moment to survey the diverse gathering before beginning her address. "Thank you all for being here tonight to mark this milestone in our ongoing journey," she began. 18 months ago, what could have been simply an unfortunate incident became instead an opportunity for meaningful change. Not because of any special insight on my part, but because of the collective commitment of thousands of people who recognized that how we treat each other matters, at every altitude, in every context, regardless of status or circumstance. She gestured toward the exhibition displays surrounding them. What you see documented here isn't just a corporate initiative or a marketing campaign. It's a movement built on a simple but powerful premise that dignity isn't a privilege to be earned through wealth or status, but a right that belongs to every person by virtue of their humanity. As the evening drew to a close and guests departed, Elise took a final walk through the exhibition, pausing before a simple display at the center, the Wings of Dignity pin enlarged and illuminated with a single quote beneath it. "Dignity isn't purchased with a premium ticket. It's earned through how we treat each other." Those words, spoken in the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, had resonated far beyond their original context, becoming a touchstone for a movement that continued to grow and evolve. They represented not just a response to one incident, but a vision for a world where respect wasn't contingent on status, appearance, or circumstance, where the true measure of a person was found not in their title or wealth, but in how they recognized and upheld the inherent dignity of others. That vision had taken flight 18 months ago aboard SE-335, and now, sustained by the collective commitment of thousands who shared its values, it soared ever higher, transforming not just how people traveled, but how they saw each other and themselves. In the quiet of the empty exhibition space, Elise Blackwood smiled at the simple truth that had guided her from the beginning: dignity, once recognized, could never be displaced. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's arrogance collapsed when they realized who they were really dealing with? Those instances when assumptions based on appearance suddenly shatter against the reality of capability, authority, or achievement. Elise Blackwood's story reminds us that dignity isn't something we purchase with status symbols or assert through wealth and connections. It's something we earn through how we treat others, especially those we perceive as having less power than ourselves. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear about times in your life when you've seen quiet strength triumph over loud entitlement. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire others facing similar situations to stand firm in their own dignity. The power of Elise's response wasn't in humiliating Vanessa Whitmore, but in demonstrating that true leadership isn't about asserting authority. It's about upholding principles consistently, regardless of who's watching. That's a lesson that extends far beyond first-class cabins into every aspect of our lives. If you found this story powerful, please hit that like button right now. It really helps this channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you these incredible true stories of justice and dignity. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss next week's story about a black surgeon who was mistaken for a janitor at his own hospital, only to later perform life-saving surgery on the administrator who tried to have him removed. Remember, respect costs nothing, but the lack of it might cost you everything. Thank you for watching, and until next time, travel with dignity wherever your journey takes you.